Canada's first and only female Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Kim Campbell, has had a full life of firsts. From the age of 16, when she became the first female student body president of her high school, and then 30 years later as the 19th Prime Minister of Canada, Ms. Campbell has spent much of her life breaking barriers for women. She served at all three levels of government in Canada. After leaving politics, she served as the Canadian Consul General in Los Angeles and then taught at the Harvard Kennedy School, after which she became an international leader of leaders with organizations such as the International Women's Forum and the Club de Madrid. Holding audiences since the age of 10, Ms. Campbell speaks widely on issues related to leadership, international politics, democratization, climate change, gender, and Canadian-American relations, addressing audiences. She has spoken on every continent except maybe Antarctica. In the spring of 2020, Ms. Campbell joined the Women in Cloud community as an ambassador of our inaugural Empower Her Access campaign. Ms. Campbell, we are honored and delighted for you to be here with us today to open the Women in Cloud Summit. You have an incredible story. You have been a trailblazer and you have broken glass in so many ways. As the first and only female Minister of Defence of Canada, the first and only female Prime Minister of Canada, and sitting with former heads of state and members of the International Women's Forum, you have overcome so many barriers. And I believe sharing stories like yours is what will help us change the narrative. So I wanted to ask you to maybe give a little bit of your background and share your own story in your own words.
Well, thank you very much, Gabriella. And I'm very conscious that I'm in the company of extraordinary women. And there are so many extraordinary women now that it isn't even a novelty. And somebody sent me a little WhatsApp video today with all of the women who are currently either president or prime minister of countries in the world. And there are a lot of them. And I'm part of an organization, the Council of Women World Leaders, which brings together current and former women presidents and prime ministers. So I would say that in the course of my life, things have really changed. But I started out, as a young girl, my parents were both in uniform in World War II. And so although I was born after the war, it was a big deal, and, TV and movies and whatever. And I wanted to be part of some process that would make that not happen again. And when I was a teenager, I wanted to be the first woman Secretary General of the UN. So I always wanted to live a life that was bigger than just my own life. And it was only when I got into my 20s that I thought maybe of going into politics, although I'd been student council president of my high school, but that isn't really politics in the same way. But I think what's so interesting is that when I was a young woman, there weren't a lot of female role models. And it was easy for people to say, well, Kim, you're smart, but where's the female Einstein? Where's the female Mozart, et cetera? So to make you feel that if you were, quote, smart, you were an anomaly. That is just rubbish. It was rubbish then. And one of the things that's been important to me is the idea of restoring the narrative that women belong in all of these places, because it's nothing new that women are smart. The problem is when you're not one of the expected people, it's easy to dismiss you as an anomaly. So people don't have to keep telling your stories. But there are female Einsteins. In fact, Einstein himself recognized that Emmy Noether, the physicist Emmy Noether, was one of the most important people, was certainly the most important woman, but one of the most important people in physics. So women, mathematicians and physicists and astronomers and chemists and all of these kinds of things. The first novel was written by a woman. Women have been trailblazers in so many ways. And what makes me happy now is that as we tell these stories, and we need to keep telling them, and we need to change the narrative, but it means it gives women today answers. It gives them a context in which they can say, I'm smart, and there aren't enough people like me in leadership or in this organization, but there's plenty of women like me who have established the capacity of women to do these jobs. I'm not an exception to the rule. I'm one of many smart women. And that's one of the changes, I think, in my own life that really gratifies me. And of course, it's been accompanied by changes in law and policy, too, which have helped to reduce discrimination, not eliminated it by any means, but have also assisted the aspirations of women.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's because of the trailblazing that you did. in being one of the first that has opened the door for so many more women to enter into such prestigious realms of politics. And so how does that make you feel, like knowing that I agree with you, like people just we need to be out there in mass, because that eliminates the you're special and it makes it okay for everyone to pursue. How does it make you feel, though, to have been one of those trailblazers that has opened the doors for so many of us?
Well, it's interesting. When I became prime minister, I took over the leadership of my party at a time we had to call an election very soon. My predecessor was the most unpopular prime minister in the history of Canadian polling, although time is kinder to people. His reputation is actually much better now. In the summer of 1993, Gallup said that I had the highest approval rating for a prime minister in 30 years. So clearly Canadians were excited about having a woman prime minister. But I was not able, there were a whole lot of factors that, the new parties that had appeared and things that had eroded our vote. So I wasn't able to win the general election. But in the summer of 93, when I was prime minister, that period of time, it clearly meant a lot, not just to women, but to men also. I remember the night that I was elected leader of the party. One of my supporters, a man, he had tears coming down his cheeks saying, "This is for my daughter." People understood what that meant. And so it was a great honor for me, a privilege to be the vehicle that changed people's sense of what was possible. And years later, when I went to create a leadership college at the University of Alberta, it was so interesting for me how many women said to me, I can still remember the day you became prime minister, the night you were as leader, and what it meant. And I used to have your picture on my wall, and it just really changed my sense of what I could be. So that is a great and wonderful experience. But the thing is that there are so many brilliant women, and it's great for me that I was able to do that. But as I've gotten older, I realized, there are plenty more at home like me. There's a lot of brilliant women around, and many more that are smarter and more accomplished than I am. So I'm really happy to have been a tile in the mosaic of progress. But I'm by no means an anomaly. And that is also very heartwarming, the opportunity that I've had to meet other women who in so many fields, in so many ways, and not just women in terms of professional competence, but I've done a lot of work since I had political retirement thrust upon me by the Canadian electorate. I've done a lot of work around the world promoting democracy. And I've been in countries, where I've met women who are under very difficult circumstances, in countries where they're really struggling to create democratic institutions and get recognized. Women who are so strong and so resourceful. I'm honored to be even able to support them. And they often say that they're encouraged that somebody like me, who was prime minister of a developed country, feels that what they're doing is important. But I'm honored to have the chance to support them, because whatever they're going through is so much harder than what I had to go through. So the reservoir of female strength around the world is really wonderful. And when it gets a chance to flourish and express itself, it's remarkable and great for the world, frankly.
I agree 100% with you. And as a matter of fact, in Melinda Gates' book, Moment of Lift, she talks about that. She talks about how when you have a society and you're able to uplift the women in that society and create a stronger stage of equity, that many of the ills of that society actually disappear or mitigate. So, I'm curious, in all of your travels, what do you think it will take for us to truly break through on this narrative? Because while I think we've made progress, we're hardly there.
Well, I think we have to take power more seriously. Power is real, and somebody's going to have it. And I always say to women, if you would exercise it ethically and in the national interest, why shouldn't it be you? But women often say, "Oh, I don't want to talk about power. Ooh, that's the sort of men are interested in power." Well, power exists, and somebody's going to have their hands on the levers. So who those hands are important. And your opening remarks by Senator Patty Cooder, I thought were wonderful, because what she demonstrated was the difference it makes in having the lived experience of women at the table when people are making policy. There was a time when the issues of women and families and children were considered kind of subsidiary issues, women's issues. And the men would say, well, let us solve the serious problems. And then when we've solved the serious problems, we'll focus on women's issues. So we now know that women's issues are fundamental. They're at the heart. As you were talking about Melinda Gates, the Pew Research Organization, which does all this amazing research around the world on social and political developments, they concluded a number of years ago that the best indicator of the social, political, and economic development of a country was the status of its women. It's like the women are the canary in the mine. If you're looking at a country where women do not have legal status, where they can't own property, where they don't have the ability to get an education, all these things, you're looking at a country in trouble. You're looking at, don't invest there, or except if you're investing in the education of women. In other words, these are countries that are really in trouble because it is so important for women to be playing their role. And when they're in politics, and even it's been found that even one woman on a bench can change the culture of a court. Because there's so many ways in which the reality of life as women live it, if it's not expressed, men, with the best of intentions, just get it wrong. And in many ways, some of our best allies are men. There are a lot of men who do get it. I always say the advancement of women isn't men versus women. It's the men and women who get it working to persuade the men and women who don't get it. And many men do get it, and are keen. Well, it was a male prime minister who made me the first female minister of justice in Canada. And that was an enormously important position for me, aside from setting the stage for me to ultimately become leader. I convened a national symposium on women law and the administration of justice that was kind of revolutionary in terms of changing the agenda of criminal law reform. So, the men who are our allies, have to be loved and cherished, and the men who are not need to be enlightened.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It is about bringing out the ally in all of us and having us step into that allyship and step into leadership to support each other and build community and really uplift everyone in the society, because diversity does bring the better access and better outcomes. So organizations like the Women in Cloud are helping to change that perception. Could you talk a little bit about the importance in your mind of community and creating access and opportunity for women?
Well, I think it's really important, and I think that what Women in Cloud is doing is really vital. And I think it was Senator Cooter or somebody else yesterday at the opening said that we're talking about. Oh no, it was somebody else talking about artificial intelligence. That 80% of the people working in tech and artificial intelligence are men. And so many of these, so there's two things. One is the ability of women to have careers and to not have to make their way in environments that are very kind of macho and hostile. And what's so interesting is that those cultures are usually poised for disaster. You look at what's happening in social media, and the total oblivion of many of our social media platforms to the absolute chaos they are creating for democracy. These are people, who, I've often said the moral sensibility of war criminals. These are people who don't, hello, democracy is a very fragile and precious thing, and you are playing a big role in it, and you need to think about what that means for your society, for the health of its institutions, and for what it means to the lives of individual people. And it's not that women are necessarily, more morally adept than men. It's just that we aren't privileged in the same way, and we bring a different perspective, and we have different realities that we're comfortable with, and we also have different kind of culture when we're together. We know that when you have a male-dominated institution, you often have a kind of a group think. If you read the story about the collapse of Lehman Brothers, I remember in 2008 there was a wonderful book about it. And it was just the absolute classic organization designed for bad decision making. Very male dominated, very macho, very kind of gung ho, and a CEO who didn't want to hear from anybody. And the tragedy is that when it collapsed, all of these people at Lehman Brothers who were encouraged to spend their bonuses on Lehman Brothers stock so that they could rise and share the benefits of Lehman Brothers profitability, they wound up with nothing. And so when Christine Lagarde said at the meeting of Davos that followed the 2008 crisis, when she said, that if Lehman Brothers had been Lehman Sisters, it might have been a different situation. But optimally, it would be Lehman Brothers and Sisters. In other words, with women, people say, well, we're not such risk takers. Well, I think it's not that women don't take risks. Women take risks every time they go out of doors. I think people totally fail to appreciate the extent to which risk and threat and strategic vigilance is built into women's lives. But sadly, that's the way we live. But what it means is that we take risks, calculated risks. We take considered risks. We don't take risks based on showing, as some kind of quality, a machismo or some kind of quality that in fact can lead us down the garden path. And so when you have a combination of outlooks, and that's why this diversity, the cognitive diversity is so important in institutions, you get that balance. But I resent it when people say women aren't risk takers. Our whole lives we're taking risks. The fact that we get up and go out the door in the morning, we have to assess those risks. But the stakes are very high for women. And they're also high in organizations that if women don't succeed, they don't get second chances in the same way. And we have to stand up for one another and allow one another. Women have to support one another to make the mistakes that are an integral part of learning and growing. So I just think that what Women in Cloud is doing is so important because you're building connections and you're supporting each other. And I mean, the excellence of all of you, I mean, they're just so self-evident. I mean, you don't even have to prove it anymore. I mean, that's there. But you need that solidarity and you need that support that enables you to take the risks that you'd like to take without having them be so high stakes that you pull back from sticking your neck out because you don't think that if it doesn't work out, you'll get a second chance. Women need to have the same support that men get. And I think by creating that network, you can, but also bringing the perspective of the lived experience of women. And all women aren't alike. I mean, women, we lead such different lives. For me, my concern about women has been the portal through which I've come to be much more, I think, enlightened about issues of race and other forms of exclusion, because I can reason by analogy to what people experience when they don't get the benefit of the doubt, when they're seen to not belong, and that they constantly every morning they have to get up and prove themselves again. So I think as women, we have the capacity to bring our experience to make a much more humane world, that the result of which is to liberate the creativity and quality that so many people can contribute to our shared lives, and that in many cases are just are stifled because of the society that we have.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I have felt in many situations that it's just unfair, I think, as women, that in every conversation we have to reprove our credibility in order to be heard and in order to be seen. And to your point, that creates this level of extra burden and risk taking to open your mouth about something that you have an opinion on, and it squelches a lot of people from speaking up. And so I agree with you that as women, we need to stand together. We need to create opportunities for each other, and we need to go to bat for each other. And I think that allyship, both with women and with men, is what will help us change that narrative. Which goes to really the theme of the Women in Cloud Summit, which is collective power. So how do you think about the idea of collective power?
Well, I think when I was a much younger woman, there were so many barriers to women. Even if you were applying for a graduate scholarship, and they said, well, you're just going to get married. And I mean, it was just so hard. And so women, in a sense, were competing with one another. Sometimes there'd only be one or two women who would get to be partners of the law firm or get to be promoted, etc. And tokenism really destroys the solidarity between women. Now, I think things have improved, partly through changes in law and policy that protect against discrimination, but also just increasing numbers of women. And of course, with these women who have demonstrated how good they are. So you get research that shows that companies who have women in their leadership, I think, lots of say a recent one by Credit Suisse, who's companies that have women on their senior management and boards of directors are more profitable. So now you can say, well, why don't you have any women? Because you're not, serving your shareholders very well. But I think that now, as more women get there, and if women show solidarity, it makes it a lot easier that women don't have to be competing against one another. And I think that there are some people think, oh, well, women were always competitive because they're, competing for the good husbands or they're competing for this. But I think when you don't have the sense that your merit will be reflected in the results of the things that you do or the jobs that you compete for, when you know that you're flying in favor, like Claudia Golden's famous research article about how symphony orchestras audition, and the ones that audition behind a screen where they can't see who's playing hire more women. But we can't live our lives auditioning behind a screen. And what that screen covers are the expectations people have that we won't be so good. But I think there are more of us, I think it's easier for us to support one another because we're not just competing for the one chance that a woman's going to get. We're going to hire a woman. Well, women should be, candidates for everything that's going if they're qualified. But even women themselves, there are studies that have shown that panels of men and women in science faculties would require a woman to have 2.5 times as many publications as a man to be seen as an equal candidate. And so we can ourselves internalize that sense that maybe we made it, but the others maybe won't be so good. And sometimes women are afraid that if a woman fails, that'll spoil it for all of them. And I think we just have to demand the same rights to fail that men have, and the same opportunity, the same right to make our own way and be part of things that men have. And I would be very happy if someday women had the same sense of privilege that men have, and were seen as the default category when you wanted to get somebody good.
I agree. Because when you think about it, the what you were saying before about women don't take risk, it's like, well, that's because you fall farther and faster when you fail as a woman than you do as a man. And that is something that has to change, because we need to be where we won't succeed unless we take those risks, unless we put ourselves out there, unless we're okay being vulnerable. And it is the importance of that collective power, because collectively we succeed, and we can support each other, and we can encourage each other. I think one of the things that you've mentioned quite a few times is access to this, changing the policies, changing the processes, changing the underlying foundation and system. And the goal of the Women in Cloud is to help women entrepreneurs create $1 billion in economic access and opportunity by the year 2030. So I wanted to know, from your experience and all of the councils and the groups that you work with, what would be our most effective way to reach that goal?
Well, I think you have to be able to show, and I think you can. There's increasingly research that helps it, and maybe even commissioning your own. You have to be able to show that this is good business. At the end of the day, even a woman investor, she may sentimentally, want to invest in women-owned companies, but it'll be a lot easier for her to do that when she knows that, this is going to be a good investment. And, you had a panel, I think Yuval Neiman, I think his name was, who talked about his own investment company that is very happy to support women-owned businesses. I chaired a foundation in Kiev, and I met once with a group, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, because Canadians, a lot of them went over to try and, after the fall of the Soviet Union and Ukraine becoming independent. And I was meeting with these Canadians, and most of the ones who went left fairly quickly because they got fleeced. It wasn't their grandparents' Ukraine, and they discovered it was pretty risky. But one of the men who had stayed said to me, I only do business with companies owned by women. He said, they're honest, they're effective, I can rely on them, They're really smart, and it was really interesting because culturally he felt there was just a big difference, that they didn't see it as a chance to rip him off. They wanted to build a relationship, and I think sometimes our lack of hubris, the fact that we haven't had that sense of privilege, has helped us to develop a little bit more of a humane perspective on things, that we don't expect to be able to get stuff for nothing, and to be, if we're, tall and wearing the three-piece suit and, look impressive, that we'll get what we want, that we have to earn it. And I think, and maybe someday we'll be so successful and so equal that we'll be jerks too. But I'm willing to bet on it. If that happens, sue me. I mean, but I do think that there are ways in which having to struggle a bit, and knowing that you do have to have the goods, but it also can help you to be maybe just a little kinder and a little more human in your approach. And a lot of men, it's interesting, research people who look at companies say that confident men actually usually like working for women bosses, because first of all, women bosses tend to be often more collaborative, and so they get a better chance. And so, if a man doesn't want to work for a woman, my view is, well, there's a danger sign. But, I don't think women are better than men. I think they're different than men. And I think because our lived experience is different, I think there's a lot of overlap. And women are very diverse, we're as diverse as men. It's like some men are wonderful and totally get working with women. And I've worked with some marvelous men. And I say, if my male prime minister hadn't put me in certain cabinet positions, I wouldn't have had the chance to shine. So I think that we need to recognize that we do have allies and friends out there among men, and we need to cherish them, and we need to ask them to be even more active in sponsoring us and promoting us, but also not taking no for an answer. And I think one of the things that concerns me, and I realize you're probably not a partisan organization, but my concern about the Trump administration was, I think that Donald Trump kind of normalized a certain misogynistic vocabulary and way of looking at things that was really not good for women. And I think that as much as women can, they need to use whatever collective power they have to push back against that. It's not okay to be sexist and to denigrate women. And I think also, you had somebody who's does a lot of work at sort of women's, bodies and sexuality. And I think that's also in some ways the last frontier, the right of women to be sexual beings, but to be other things as well. I mean, we don't assume a man who is a sexual being, can't run a company or solve a theorem or, send a rocket to the moon. We don't assume that. And it's the completeness of the female person that we also need to struggle to have recognized. And that's why it's interesting to see women actually challenging the taboos, even the menstruation taboo, that now you're seeing, universities and governments, supplying free sanitary products to women. It's no longer something that girls have to be embarrassed about. I mean, the female body is remarkable when you think about what we can do. We can be doing all these great things, and meanwhile, we're gestating a little new person. And the way our whole reproductive cycle works is quite remarkable. But we shouldn't be embarrassed about those things. They should just be matter of fact things that should be recognized in a civilized society. So I think that the conversation has changed a lot since I was a young woman, and to all the women who've contributed to that, I really take my hat off. But I think as women in cloud, that what's so important is that solidarity and the appreciation of one another, and I think learning one another's stories so that you can talk knowledgeably about what other women are doing, because I think those stories I mean, I just watching the conference and seeing what people are doing, I think it's wonderful. It cheers me up enormously, inspires me, but it's part of the narrative of women do this and they do it well. And if you don't support them, you're missing out. Women are a great bet for partnership and for investment.
Absolutely. I agree. I mean, and I think that you said it very well, that leadership has no boundaries. It has no boundaries between whether you're female or male. A great leader is a leader who has integrity, who has honesty, who's willing to be vulnerable, who's authentic, who shows empathy, and who leads with the collaboration and the collective in mind, the collective outcomes, and is not selfish, and thinks about a greater purpose. And those are great leadership qualities. I do believe that organizations that have a great mix of women and men are more likely to get to that level of leadership for their organization. And I do think that women do carry a lot of those qualities because of our lived experience, because it is not as privileged as the men that we work with. And I think that is what creates great female leaders, and we need to recognize and reward that women are just as capable, if not more capable, of being great leaders as men. And so I appreciate all that you have done to help show the way, that you continue to do in the forums in which you work, to continue to promote and advocate on behalf of women, and really empower women and unlock that value through simple conversations with the women you were talking about, where you respect and you honor the work that they do, and that inspires them. And you have been inspiring to me. So I would like to thank you, Ms. Campbell, for your time today, for your collaboration with the Women in Cloud, and for your relentless efforts to continue breaking barriers for women. I think I speak for everyone watching today when I say that your story and your words have been absolutely inspiring. So thank you very much, and we look forward to watching you continue to go on to even greater success.
Thank you. It's a labor of love, and thank you for inspiring me, and all the best to Women in Cloud.